like we were saying earlier, you can't learn something like it might be cool to be like, I want to go talk to somebody who like runs something at Blizzard, right? You're not gonna learn jack shit from doing that.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Several times. Mm-hmm. And every time it was like talking to an alien.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 533 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam.
And this is a show where we talk about how to blah, blah. Today is August 4th, 2025. Before we start, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show, as well as incomprehensible language that if you haven't been listening to our previous episodes, you will not have the context for.
And even then,
understand.
You may have to have listened to just a really large number of them.
Yeah. You get it.
To be fair, though, it's
or
the
not.
morning. It's early in the morning. My lips haven't learned how to move yet, you know?
That's true.
Yeah.
We need to do some vocal warm-ups, some unique New York sort of things.
New Yorks.
Well, normally we don't have to because normally we record on Friday and we've had all week to warm up our vocals. But it's Monday because we're doing a double recording. So as in, like, we recorded one just a couple of days ago and now we're recording two more today because I'm going to be gone next week. Sam's going to be gone next week. Adam's going to be around but sad.
Just checking
you know?
Profanity
yeah,
warning.
we did. Yeah. Okay, profanity warning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep this podcast going. So we got just basically one thing to talk about before we get into questions, because it's going to be a question-mageddon these next couple episodes, which is what happens when we record back-to-back, because there's no news between episodes. So we just did the GameTK Jam. We just finished it yesterday, as of, I guess, on August 3rd. We made a game called How Many Dudes, which, on the previous episode, we were 2 days into the was it a 5 day?
It's a 5-day jam, I think. Wednesday through Sunday of last week was the jam. And yeah, the last episode, we went very in-depth about the strategy we had this time around, the game itself, etc. So we're not going to rehash any of that, but it is out. It is playable now. And the voting has begun for the jam itself, which is really fun. So the jams, run through itch.io, actually have this built-in mechanism where if you participated in the jam, then you can rate other people's games that are in the jam. Only those people. So only the people within like the little pocket of people who did the jam in the first place. So you can't really use, you can't use a huge
we can't call it to our community to say, hey, come brigade our game and vote it to the top. Right. It's like, yeah.
So it's pretty fun to see just the response to it so far. We've gotten just a handful of like 22 ratings or so. And it's been really fun to see the comments because apparently people enjoy it. And they've been enjoying, especially fighting toddlers. I don't know if we should call it How Many Dudes.
The toddlers were, I think, a clutch moment. I think we actually thought of that. Was it during the podcast?
It might have been, yeah.
It might have been.
Or shortly after.
Yeah. But yeah, because like there's that running joke about like how many toddlers do you think you could take in a fight? And so like we just got to put that in the game because it's fucking hilarious. We never got the middle schoolers. Like it's a jam game, so we're kind of constrained in the volume of content.
For middle schoolers, you could have just scaled up the toddlers and called it a middle schooler.
Oh, that's what we would have done.
That's true.
Put a little hat on that kid.
Put Jinko pants on them.
Yep.
Put those big baggy jeans.
Yeah, keep the diaper. Just put a hat on.
Keep the diaper. Put a hat on him. Give him a yo-yo. Middle schoolers love yo-yo.
Yeah, something like that. So we managed to shove in. What do we get? We got toddlers. We got rats, wolves, goats, and gorillas.
And gorillas. Yeah. And we got like two versions of everything except for the toddlers. Yeah, we got dog-sized rats. We got goats and rams. We got a regular gorilla and then a silverback gorilla.
And a wolf and an alpha wolf.
A wolf and an alpha wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got enough variations of stuff in there that the gameplay loop actually goes quite a long time. Unfortunately, if you max out your upgrades, then the game will crash.
I guess any one of the upgrades, if you max them out.
Yeah, if you max out any one of the upgrades, then like the next time that upgrade rolls around in your shop, or which is like not supposed to happen, then the game crashes. Right. So whoops on that one. But the fortunate thing is it takes like quite a while for that to happen. Probably a good like 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how fast you're moving through the game. Mm-hmm. And we've been hearing about that crash a lot, which means a lot of people who booted up the game just kind of dumped like almost an hour into it. So
it's
getting a good response.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the response so far, and also again, going back to that strategy that we discussed a lot last week, I think we did the things we tried to do. That's the kind of the fun part is like, when you're first starting out, and I mean, frankly, in anything, but especially in games because of how multidisciplinary they are. It's oftentimes the case that you can kind of, at least at the beginning, you might be able to see something that you want to make, but you just can't actually execute. You know what I mean? Like there's a very big gap on like 12 different dimensions, whether it's, sound, the UI design, whatever. And so you can't quite reach the thing you're envisioning. And so it is very fun to be at this point where, at least in a 2D context, it feels like we can, if we envision a thing, we could just go build it. It's like just not a problem. And so that's where sharpening that,
got to work on that vision.
The vision, making that shit a little less blurry is kind of the goal. And I think we did a pretty good job with this one. So it's been fun.
Yeah. So definitely go check it out. It's at bscotch.itch.io. I think it'll just be the first game on the list there. And we have talked about, should we expand this? Should we keep going with this game once we're done with Crashlands 2, whatever we work on next? Do you guys want to see more How Many Dudes? Should we make a full game experience out of it? Because it was super fun to work on. I'd love to work on it some more. It's the kind of game though that like we could make a real big game out of it and have it out in like a month. Because just we purposely went for a simple visual style, very intuitive gameplay. Like we didn't need to make a tutorial. We didn't have to give a shit about the new player experience because
I think a big part of the importance of the toddlers was actually that we talked about one of the pillars of the design strategy going forward is that when someone starts playing the game, they're just immediately in an interesting scenario. And so the toddlers was actually
the first thing you do is fight some toddlers.
Fight 10 toddlers. Yeah. And you're just
and
and there's only one thing to do when you boot up the game. You click enter the dude ranch, and then it's like it shows you have one regular dude, and then it has one matchup, which is your regular dude versus 10 toddlers, and you just click fight, right? And your guy just pummels these toddlers, right? And then you're back in the ranch, and now you made some money, you can recruit a dude, and then you choose what to fight next, right? So we did make a new player sort of onboarding ramp. Like we didn't just throw the whole UI at you all at once. We gave you like an interesting entry point, and so
that's the thing. It's like
but it's self-explanatory. There's not
self-explanatory
tutorial process.
I got this dude. He's fighting toddlers. Let's go. I get it.
I will say my wife played last night, and since I knew about the crash, then I stopped her from clicking the final
maxing out upgrades. Yeah.
So she got like round 77, I think. And somewhere around 70.
I made it to 80.
Yeah, somewhere around round 70, she fought 2,700 toddlers. Because we didn't manage to get the optimizations in before this.
Started to struggle a bit, probably.
It literally, the game, it was booted and it turned into the match. It was just a field of toddlers and my dude standing there. And then you would hear a sound effect literally every 5 seconds. For like a minute and a half, and then it slowly started ramping up speed. It took, I think, like 4 minutes for the whole fight
to chug
run.
through.
And
it's a combinatorial explosion problem because all the different things on screen kind of like each thing checks each other thing to see if it should kind of like make space. But at a certain point, it's like if you got more than like 300 things on screen, you don't need to even do those checks anymore because there's so much shit happening that it doesn't really matter if things go inside of other things. You can't tell what's happening, right? So there's a lot of pretty easy optimizations we can do to make it so that you can fight not only 2,000, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 toddlers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm ready.
And the other problem too is just spawning that many toddlers because like GameMaker has to instantiate instances, So there's probably some kind of like a bucketing thing you could do, which is like if you have certain numbers of things, then like make them into one object and just like group them together visually somehow.
There have been some games whose whole thing was trying to figure out how to do like large numbers,
just huge numbers.
And like they are billions was a good example.
Yeah, they are billions is the classic one. There are a handful of other ones.
So if we make this game for real, like we're gonna do that shit because. And you can even offload like swarming behaviors and stuff onto the GPU through very unusual methods. Because like the GPU isn't really used for much else in this game, frankly. It's just rendering sprites, but we're not doing any shaders. There's no fancy blending. It's just thousands of toddlers. That's what's going on. So I mean, we're super excited about it. Definitely give it a play, and we'll have a link in the show notes probably. So any other thoughts about the jam? It was fun.
It's good.
I'm glad we did it. All right, let's get into questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. Highest upvoted question comes from Kevin, who says, what are your thoughts on the concept of auteurs in game development, or people that become the face of game studios? Perhaps Kojima being the biggest example. As the front-facing people in Butterscotch Shenanigans, the three Bscotch Bros, do you see pros and cons to this approach in terms of marketing a game or an operation of a game studio? I think it's a bit goofy to kind of elevate individual people like that, because they always have giant teams of people behind them, and they'll have good ideas and good visions and stuff like that. But it's people tend to take like the opinions or the commentary of these figureheads as sort of like just truths. And they're flawed human beings just like the rest of us. They can have good takes and they can have bad takes. Like I even just saw an article last week about Kojima talking about how AAA is dying because every game looks the same. And I'm like, this is the guy who made Death Stranding, which looks good, but it does just look like a gritty, realistic AAA game. And the idea that like because he's been in the industry a long time, he's made a lot of successful titles, that he can just like have a take and people are like, yeah. And then it just gets kind of like broadcast out across articles as if it's true. You know what I mean?
I think really what you're speaking of is really just almost like the negative side of the coin here. Cause like, I think the reality is too, that having basically a face man, right? Like what you call in a band or front man is super useful in both the business context.
Yeah.
And in a relation to fans context. Yep. So it's
because people care about people. They don't care about concepts.
Yeah. You got your Todd Howard. You know,
exactly. So it's like it is very different if Todd Howard goes in a room to negotiate with someone versus
or Chris Metzen.
Exactly. Versus, random senior technical engineer on something, or even like game director at a thing, but nobody knows who it is. And so I think the reality is it's super beneficial for a studio to have one of these.
Oh, yeah.
What's tricky is
and these people are super important, and like they're oftentimes very visionary, and they have these moments where like they can see things that other people can't, or they approach problems in a certain way that allows them and their team to do incredible things. Like I was thinking about the story of when they were working on World of Warcraft and they were trying to like come up with the design of the world and stuff like that. And Chris Metzen realized like they had just been going in circles just for weeks and weeks and months trying to figure out like how everything was going to work. Mm-hmm. And he realized that like they needed a frame of reference. And so he just came into their office and brought like a big ass bucket of paint. And he just painted a map on the wall of what the world was going to be. Yep. This is the world. Like we're making World of Warcraft. We need to know what the world is. And so we need to start with that. So I'm just going to start painting and just put that up on the wall, and it's going to be huge and everybody can see it. And it's like, these people like that, they have these moments where it kind of cements them as like a legend, Mm-hmm. And I think you're right that like having those people as like the face of a company is super useful, because like we should respect them, and their words do have a lot of carry a lot of weight, and so like, but yeah, on the flip side of that, it doesn't mean that they are omniscient, right?
Yeah, I think the what's interesting to me is actually the people who are in the same industry space, I think, are the ones who are most at risk to be misled by a figure like that. What I mean by that is like, in our early days, I think in some early podcast episodes we mentioned this, but we met Warren Spector at like one of the first conferences we went to. It was a really low-key conference. I can't remember which one it was. If it was like the Indie PopCon one or something. It was like really early days for us.
I think it was in Austin.
Oh, yeah.
It was before I was even really part of the studio.
Yeah.
It was in Austin. Yeah, and it was when Sam, you were up all night with fevers because you had cancer.
Yeah,
and that was undiagnosed.
I forgot about that. Yeah. So we met Warren Spector at this thing, and again, similar, industry legend person who's made these things, and so excited to see him talk. He gave a keynote. It was fine, and then we got to ask questions, and so I was like really excited. And one of the questions we asked was basically, we're based in St. Louis. We've been struggling trying to find kind of like.
I mean, we'd only been operating for under a year.
Yeah. So we're just kind of struggling to find someone who is basically ahead of us, but in the same kind of vein, but who's willing to actually like talk to us and share some notes. You know what I mean? Like
a mentor.
Yeah. And I still remember his response, which was just, well, you just move out of St. Louis.
Yeah, you just have to move.
Which was, again, it's like, and this is the problem, which is that it's not usually people like fans, players don't have enough context for the ideas of these people about how the industry runs to be like damaging to them. That doesn't really happen, right?
Yeah.
If Kojima says that like, oh yeah, every game in AAA space is dying because it's like trying to look the same. That doesn't
The
do
thing
it
is,
with players.
he's not wrong. He's not 100% right, but he's not 100% wrong about that either. It's like,
but that's also what every single gamer says, So like, it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also
it's not a hot take exactly.
Yeah. So, but then if let's say you're a dev and because a lot of devs then worship these people, and that's actually it's one thing for players too as a fan. I think you're not in the same line of work, right? So there's not a risk of you taking the supposed expertise.
You're not taking advice from Kojima.
Exactly.
If you're just a
and
player,
then like running your life based on it, right? And so I think that's where the risk comes in with a lot of this stuff, which is like you see one of these hot takes from any one of these large figureheads. And the reality is like because of where they are, the rules are just different for them. They also
like don't take MMO advice on how to make a successful MMO from Chris Metzen.
Yeah, that was so long ago. It's not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
And even if like it was nowadays, if in a similar context, if Blizzard launched a successful MMO right now, right, you can't use that as a model. Like the people who worked on that were working in a bubble. Yes. That's a different type of bubble than what you're in. Like the types of things that affect them and the ways they have to make decisions don't translate.
Yes.
Outside of that.
And so I think it's very useful then for as a business entity to have someone who is a front face for a studio. I think it's very also useful from a communication standpoint to have that for like the studio's representation toward its player base, right? I think the more challenging relationship is actually within the industry itself. People looking up to a figure like that, taking their word as gospel, and then doing things, right, that are like business decisions or strategic game decisions based on that, like the non-nuanced quotes from Kojima or whatever else ends up being just a recipe for a very sad time.
Well, especially because part of what people want from the figureheads, right, is because what journalists want is like, hey, there's this thing I'm writing about. I want to hear the soundbite that all these famous people have about it. Or if you're going to a conference and you're like, okay, I want somebody to give a keynote speech. So I want to make sure it's full of like really clean stories about how you found success. Right. Or, hey, we're going to go give a talk. I want to make sure that we have a nice bullet list. Because like if you sit at a GDC talk, they're like, what are the key takeaways from your thing? Right. And it's like, it's a required component of it. Where they're basically like, we want you to boil down, like, here are the things you'll learn by going to this thing.
Right? And that makes sense, right? Because you don't have room. You can't have extreme nuance when you're doing.
Yeah, it all makes sense. But what all of these factors are driving towards is basically like they're saying, hey, you need a figurehead. That person needs to be increasingly popular to even be considered to be asked questions about this stuff, right? Or to have these opportunities. And what we want to see when that happens is no nuance, very clean, just like, here are the bullet points of the things to do, right? And then if you do that, then people like it and you get invited back, right? And so you end up with this perpetuating circle, that's all. If you don't consume these things, understanding the absence of the nuance that's in them and the absence of sufficient context and the non-portability of whatever that context is to your space, right?
Which I will say is exactly where you're at when you start. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like if you've been in it for a while and you
don't know enough to even know what the contexts are and what
exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you want a good example of how like these people who are legends are built up by their teams.
Yes.
Look at what happens when these people kind of start drinking their own Kool-Aid and then they're like,
because that's the other bit of it is if you do that long enough, then a lot of people start to think that actually I am really the one like doing all this and I have always been correct and my context is the only context. So they start to
and I'm tired of all these other people like holding me back. I'm going to go off on my own. Yeah. And so then they start their own studio, they start their own team, they break away, and whatever they make is often good. But it is not incredible and it doesn't really make a big splash like the stuff that they were doing with their previous company.
And that'll be despite the fact that they have every advantage because, again, every news outlet's going to be like, hey, this famous person just started their own studio. Yeah, they're going to breathlessly cover everything that they do. And so they have every advantage. And then when you watch what actually comes out of that, it's usually like, like you're saying, it's usually fine.
I think it's when the figurehead forgets that they're part of a body. Then
you can't just have a head with no body.
And you do see this. It's very funny. It's like, it's sad, but it's funny. And I think
like Sam, you're that Masters of Doom book, right? Wasn't that kind of?
Yeah. So Romero and Carmack was an interesting version of this in terms of the split, right? And I can't remember the exact specifics, so I'm not going to try to like fully piece it together. But essentially, there's a
whole book about it called Masters of Doom.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and it is essentially along the lines of having this increasing split between then these like essentially two figureheads, one of which is much more external. In Romero's case, very charismatic dude, and one who is basically the technical genius underlying the whole thing, which is Carmack.
Almost like a Jobs and Wozniak situation.
Yeah, there's usually this dichotomy, and then having this fallout between the two of them because there was this idea that it was all because of one or the other. You know, that's even worse scenario where you have two people who are like, it was all me, both people doing it, as opposed to like one person being like,
I could have done this with any partner, and like you should be thankful that I picked you to be my technical person, or
and so
vice versa.
I think the reality is if you have a figurehead who doesn't have who isn't aware of like why it is that they're standing where they are, right? That they are a head on top of a body, then I think that's where you get like more and more unhinged nonsense, and then that's where you typically see it kind of at some point. It can last a very long time depending on the success level. Like you see these people still getting like fuckloads of investor money typically, right? To make studios to do whatever, and sometimes they just hop from like investor to investor while the things get kind of destroyed in the process. It's not really making anything for years after having had a big success of some sort. I'm not going to name names, but like literally look around. Like
it just happens every time. You don't need to name names.
Yeah, so
I think it's because there's the head and the body part that you're talking about, right? But I think and that's a significant part, no doubt. But I think there's a less visible part, which I think is potentially more important, which is that I think you can transplant heads and bodies around to an extent, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But you can't. You can't just fully separate them and keep them separate.
Well, no, it's not that.
You can't just have
the
heads
problem
with no
is
body.
that if you're trying to, because you only care about that if you're trying to go from one high success scenario to create a new one, right? And when you do that, the biggest thing you're changing isn't even teams and heads, right? It's full fucking context, right? Yeah. And it's the context of what created the success in the first place. And most of success is driven by random factors, right? Mm-hmm. And driven by the exact right moment in time. Right?
Timing, opportunity.
Yeah, it's all this kind of stuff that is not reproducible at all, which is also why an individual team, like Blizzard hasn't made World of Warcraft 2, right? Or they haven't made a thing that like comes next, right?
Well, they like their most recent game, Warcraft Rumble, they're shutting it down.
Yeah,
they launched it like a year and a half ago, and it's just not making.
And of course, they've also it's been a long time, so they've also changed all their heads of things.
That's right. They're not shutting it down. They're just stopping. It's a live service game, but they're stopping work on it, which is basically just let it die, kind of a thing.
But you'll see this with basically any team that they have. If they're really lucky, they'll have a series of like basically pretty successful titles, but one extremely successful one, right? Mm-hmm. And then they forever try for the rest of time to replicate that one really successful, huge success, mm-hmm. and they can't do it. Even the same figurehead and the same team, right? Can't do it, and it's because so much of that, and I think, and this is where
that's where you can have games that do by the same team that do really well, right? But they may not. Like basically hitting that point where it's like an extreme breakout. Yeah. That's where it is. It's the marriage of full context of where the market's at with the thing you made.
But it's those extreme breakouts that create basically the fandom and the sense that this person knew what they were doing and were responsible for that, right? Yeah.
And again, they probably did, but it's like the extreme,
but not in a reproducible way.
Yes. Yeah.
To
that guaranteed way. Right?
Yeah. And so, and I think this is where you have the biggest loss of nuance problem when you hear people talking is what you want to hear when you go to a convention or whatever is you want to hear from the person responsible for the biggest hit that you've ever even heard of, right? Because you want to have the biggest hit that anybody's ever heard of next, 100%. Right? And so you want to hear the lessons from that to see if you can figure out how to reproduce it. And that person, and the problem is that person usually thinks they know. They think they know why that happened, right? And they're brought there because the people who are asking them to present want to have them tell everybody else the truth, well, I think the truth about what it takes to do it, right?
You know, even if you have the ability to recognize just the time element of stuff or like the overriding context that you're in, what people want to hear is oftentimes just process wise. Like how did this person think through? That's what I find most interesting. You know, listening to different designers, different game directors, or whatever else, like hearing how they think about things so I can take.
But thinking of those descriptively rather than prescriptively.
Which is just here's what happened and here's how we thought about it at the time. And then here's what happened afterwards as a consequence, we think as a consequence. But of course, that's useful because it's data, right? But it's not necessarily wisdom. It's just like, it's here's what we did and here's what happened. Very useful. But yeah, don't think that just because somebody is a successful figurehead at a large studio that they're just going to be able to just drop a success like plan in your lab. You know?
Yeah, I do think there's along this line, like it is one of my favorite things is just hearing how these different, whether it's a figurehead or whatever else, how it is that they conceptualize these like the various parts of the process that we talk a lot about on the podcast, whether it's pre-production, just like the initial design phase of coming up with whatever you're coming up with, how they run production, whatever else. I do really like digging into that. I watched the God of War documentary with Corey Balrog, which is super interesting. And just recently, there was a really fun video, a discussion between, I think it's Jonas Tyroller, who did Thronefall, interviewing, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the one who did the Thomas the Choo Choo Train game and this Jailbreak game that's coming out soon that has gotten a lot of attention. And one of the most fun conversations I've watched in a while, because I think Jonas comes from the angle more so like where we generally are. Yeah, which is like more focused on mechanics, kind of mechanical stuff first in those initial prototypes, going kind of quick and iterating through mechanical and systemic stuff to find a game that like has some pretty good long lasting like gameplay to it. And the other guy's approach is just the opposite. He doesn't prototype so much. He just takes a lot more time thinking on a high concept level. And that was part of what inspired it's part of what has been some of the puzzle pieces for us in the change in approach we've been talking about for whatever we do next, is taking a little bit more time to examine stuff on that higher level before we start bothering with mechanics, since we know we can execute now, right? And so it was really fun though seeing that conversation, because I haven't actually seen a conversation like that, especially in the indie space, where there was so much disagreement about how exactly you go about doing these things. And both these guys have been very successful. So that's what's fun about it, right? Is seeing like some of my favorite stuff at GDC is actually panels. And my favorite stuff in the industry at all is the roundtables at DICE. These are like really, I don't know, like 10 people or so.
Yeah, so it's not one person telling you how it is. It's a bunch of people who have overlapping relevant subject matter expertise, basically partially agreeing, partially disagreeing, and sometimes vehemently, you know?
Yeah, and it's like, that's the richest stuff, dude. Like I got more notes out of, I don't know, maybe 2 hours of roundtables from DICE than, in terms of like functional stuff, than from those GDC talks, because you don't have to, it doesn't take so long to do the comparison. Like if you're doing GDC talks, you got to watch a bunch of them, sequentially, versus like having all those speakers essentially at a table fighting with each other about stuff is fantastic. Yeah. Like you just take notes.
And the funny thing is, like, everybody's a little bit right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Everybody's a little bit right about everything, and probably mostly wrong about most things. Mm-hmm. and like the more we can kind of compare notes, then each of us can get a little bit more right. Mm-hmm. Nobody will ever have full context, and also the context is changing all the time. So, I feel like this is happening maybe a bit less, but like, people would ask us like, hey, do you have like advice for like how to get started in the industry? And like, I feel like 8 or 9 years ago, we did have some advice, and now we just don't, because it's like, I don't know, man. Like we're not starting.
Yeah.
Now.
That is literally what I tell people now is unfortunately, I don't have a guess.
And I mean, like there is something you can probably do, which is like make games. But how you think about that, how you find team members, are you going to need funding? Are you going to get a publisher?
Basically, where that success is going to come from is a big enough question that applies so many factors onto the making process that it's like it's just there's just so much more nuance. You know what I mean?
But it's the expertise people are asking about, like in that context. Is they're asking for expertise about starting studios. And getting them funded, right?
Right.
And we've only done it once.
We did it once.
We're not experts,
Yeah, like 15 years ago.
A long time ago. And I think that's the thing too with like launching a really successful game. It's like people who've done it again. They've done it once, maybe a few times, right? Mm-hmm. And that's it. They actually are not experts. And expertise is something that you've done. You get expertise from doing something a jillion times. So the people who did that are experts at like game production, game design, like the stuff that they spend all their actual time doing, right? But the fact is there is nobody basically in the world who is an expert in starting a studio and getting it funded.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. That's not a job you can have.
Yep.
Yeah, because I guess you could start one and get it funded repeatedly. That's basically what venture capital is for. So this is like if you're going into like the venture capital world of things for businesses, like for startups, right? There are people who are literal experts in running startups because every 2 years, new startup, they get funding. So who knows what happens to it? But there are people whose job is basically to do that. And you don't really, that's not a thing that exists really in games. It's certainly not the way or in the space where people see games that they like and are famous and that they hear about, right? So yeah, they're just like that expertise can't exist.
And this, again, it's not to say that there's not notes. And this, I think that
there's a stuff you can learn.
Like, yeah, there's always stuff to learn. Yeah, there's always stuff to learn from basically everybody, but it's important.
There's not a formula that you can just go be handed.
Yeah. Which is not a satisfying answer, which is probably why people don't, look for that kind of answer. He's like, what can I do? And like, it's hard and go figure it out. You got to just put in the work and do your best and try to get lucky and use the resources available to you. I mean,
and there are, but I think, that is part of it too, is that there are some pieces of advice that are just kind of always true, right? One is like, go talk to people, network, like that's.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, like, it's basically all the cliches. All of the cliches are true, and you don't realize
it's
how
who
true
you know
they are until you have done the world, and you're like, oh, that's why that's actually a fucking deep thing to say. And then,
well, I think it's really, I think it's a two-parter. What I think one is it's really true, but it's also because it's not that it's the full truth. It's that's the only stable truth. Right? The stable truth is the more people you know who have positions within the industry, the more likely it is that you can convert whatever you're doing to success.
Yeah,
it's also true that the better you are at doing the thing, the more likely it is that you can find success. Right? There are a few things that are just they're always true and they'll stay true, but the rest of it is this like chaos thing that at any given moment in time, something else is true about, and that's basically a matter of like what's the state of the industry, where's money coming from, what do players expect, all that kind of stuff. Right? There's this constantly moving target where that part doesn't change. And so nobody,
so like state of the world.
State of the world, tariff situation, just like all kinds of stuff come into play.
I mean, a lot of people who thought like, oh yeah, like porn games are just printing money on Steam right now. I'm gonna get in that. I'm gonna get in that side of things. Well, yoink. That's rough because I guess not all, but a lot of them got pulled down.
Yeah. Or in our case, it's like Crashlands 2 is really popular in mainland China, right? But at any moment, China could be like, nope, we're going to cut off Steam. And then all of a sudden.
Yeah, we're done with Western games. They're gone now. And that would be a similar situation.
Yeah, so we could today give people advice like, hey, you can basically like double your market if you make sure your game supports simplified Chinese and you figure out how to like find a marketing partner and blah, blah. Like we could give that advice. And then a month from now, China could be like, no more Western games, right?
Yep. But also maybe not, because like maybe something about Crashlands is uniquely positioned to do better in this.
Well, and in fact, if we look at our own data, that's what it looks like. Because like if you look at Levelhead's breakdown of like where its players are, it's like directly proportional to Steam's player base. Yeah, if you look at Crashlands or Crashlands 2, it's like mostly Chinese.
Heavily skewed Chinese.
Like heavily skewed relative to Steam.
So something about it resonates a little bit differently in that culture. Yeah. So it's like, okay.
Or just some weird accident of history that then flywheeled and then
but this is just where the probabilities come from, right? So if you think of like when people say like it's who you know that matters, it's like, well, no, it's the real saying I would argue is something probably more like it's better to know a lot of people than to not know a lot of people because it gives you more chances, right? And similarly, if you can get your game into Chinese in an affordable way, it's probably better than not getting it into Chinese. But I say probably because it might not matter.
What you're missing is the targeted aspect. I think this is where it gets funny when you see it's like you see people who don't have the expertise yet doing things in a way that sounds like it's meeting the goal of one of these things, but is actually like wasting a shitload of energy. So the perfect example of this in terms of like, it's all about who you know is literally just meeting with anybody.
Yeah, just anybody.
At like a conference event or whatever else.
Yeah. Because which we did do a lot early.
We did a lot of that early. And then we were like, wait a second. We've only every single GC we've had, only like maybe 10 to 12 conversations from that have been the kind of conversations that have changed what we do, have given us insights in the industry. And they've always come from specific like people, right?
It's always going to be, as we like to call it, it's like the kingmakers, right? It's there are people at Nintendo or Apple or Google or Xbox or Steam or whatever who make decisions that will affect your game's success. Mm-hmm. And they also which often comes down to promotion and featuring and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they also know things about how the industry or their platform works that is not public knowledge that will just sort of come out of their mouth while they're talking to you casually. in a way that they don't recognize it's not public or like not like a thing people talk about. And so we were like, oh, actually, again, there's an intentionality aspect to it where you understand when someone says the cliche version, which is, it's all about who you know. That doesn't mean you should go and just know everybody.
It's about knowing the right people.
It's the right people. So it's like,
the problem is you don't know who the right people are either. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you have to. All of it is dice rolls,
right? But the follow-up question is rarely asked, I guess, in the early days. You're not asking
who should I be trying to talk to?
Exactly. It's usually just like, I'm just going to go meet everybody.
But also on the flip side of that,
that's a natural way to do it too. When you don't, because there's the stage of anything where you know so little that the only move you really have is to try to figure out explore the space. But the only way to do that is to basically do a random search because
you just flop around. Yes.
Yeah, you just got to flop around. And I think it's an important and natural part of the process because if as you're doing so, you're identifying the things where you're like, oh, I did learn something here. What was different about that than this other conversation I had? And you basically start making your random search a biased random search, right? So that you can move into those because even though there are these various kingmakers and stuff, right? You still learn a whole bunch of stuff by people who have similar levels of sort of success and expertise and knowledge that you do in the moment.
Oh yeah,
because how they got there is different. The problems they're facing right now are not exactly the same. The stuff they tried,
and they might know people,
right?
They can hook you up with people.
But even those, I'm saying like that. Even finding those people, so being intentional about finding people who seem to be your peers or like above, a couple stages above, that's usually where most of the meat is in terms of like take home things. And then there's
because you also like we were saying earlier, you can't learn something like it might be cool to be like, I'm gonna go talk to somebody who like runs something at Blizzard, right? You're not gonna learn jack shit from doing that.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
several times, and every time it was like talking to an alien. Because like
problems are not your problems.
Yeah, the problems, the things that they think about, the ways that they solve problems.
You remember? I mean, Jeff
experiences they've had.
Kaplan gave us a tour. The director of Overwatch gave us a tour of Blizzard. That one time.
It was dope.
Yeah, we met him, and then he was like, come on down to Blizzard HQ after GDC, and I'll give you guys a tour. And we're like,
really? Yeah. He was like, fuck yeah. And we're like, well, okay. So we just fucking went. It was awesome. He's super nice.
It was awesome. But again, it's like going to another planet. Yeah, it's like the stuff going on there literally could not be more different than it would be similar to
anything. Yeah. And that's the big part of it is like trying to find people who are just literal peers. That's the thing, right? And that is where we fairly early on, became our goal is basically peers and then like business partners were like the two category of thing we were always, or I guess platform holders and that kind of category, right? Were the main things that we looked at. And that was where like, it's still like, you never know, and you just got to go do it. But it's that core piece of advice of like, it's who you know, but you don't know who you need to know. And even when you do know who you need to know, at least some of them, because you don't know everybody you need to know, getting to know them it's a non-trivial task, right? It takes a lot of energy. You may not like each other, and then that is its own whole thing, And so that's the underlying piece.
I will say, almost invariably though, the people who we've met who have been kind of like in similar positions as us have all been pretty great.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like because like often there's a lot of times there's like at GDC there'll be these like hype trains, whether it's like NFTs or blockchain shit or VR or cloud gaming or whatever, And every time there's like a wave of, I'll just say greedy people. There's a wave of greedy people who just kind of come in and they've never done anything in games, but they see one of these waves and they're like, I'm going to get in there. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to like make a business about it, or I'm going to start a studio that's going to make like the VR game, And those people can be a bit insufferable because they think
they see something that everybody else doesn't, but they're seeing a mirage, and everyone else is like,
because it's like they're like everybody else who's in the industry who is already doing stuff isn't like jumping on the blockchain because they're dumb and like I'm gonna get in there and like I'm gonna be the one to shake it up. It's like Google buying up the second floor of Moscone Convention Center, right? It's like we're gonna come in here and show people how it's done, right? Like in an industry I've never set foot in before. And like those conversations tend to go a different direction, right? But if we're talking about people who have like gone through the same stuff that we've gone through, like building up a team, building a studio from the ground up, launching games, some of which did well, some of which did poorly, and we're all kind of like on the same treadmill. Like those conversations are just great. Fun. Or even like people who like it was so interesting sitting down with the the devs from Slay the Spire.
Yeah.
You know, because
Great
like
to chat with.
you see a game with that many. Slay the Spire is interesting because when you look at it, you're like, it doesn't look incredible, you know? Like you could tell that it was like made kind of like, it was like put together by a bit more like a hodgepodge team, you know? There's like they made it in a cave with a box of scraps kind of a vibe. But also then just kind of like sitting down and talking to them about like just how tired they were.
Yeah.
And because it's just like, they weren't expecting it to do what it did. I think we met them maybe like 6 months after it kind of exploded, and they were still underwater with bug
well, I mean,
fixes.
if you think about
even
with Crashlands 2, right? The week after Crashlands 2 launched, holy shit, like the Discord was on fire, support tickets, there were so many, there were infinite things coming through. And that was for a game that was basically bug free and stable, right?
Yeah.
But
no problems, but just a lot of activity. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the thing is like when you have, and that was at our level of success with Crashlands 2. And that paled in
nothing compared to Slay the Spire.
Slay the Spire. So you imagine like taking
and we have
times,
DevOps, like we have a QA team. We've got the infrastructure to handle a lot. And even then it was a lot.
Yeah. I mean, imagine Crashlands 2 was 20 times more successful, right? Which is probably about where like Slay the Spire was, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Like that.
Oh yeah.
And then stayed because that's the other thing too is that Crashlands
stays like for 6 months.
Crashlands 2 behaves like a normal game because most games they launch, most of their activity comes, and then they fall off and
in
go
that first few weeks, first month.
Yep. Yeah, and a handful of games like Slay the Spire have that same trajectory, or they kind of go up for a while, right? And then they have a decay at some point. Usually it's still pretty fast, but then they hit some kind of a steady state that's really high still and low compared to their launch, but high compared to like a normal game, right? Mm-hmm. And that means their ongoing the ongoing activities like the Spire, I haven't like looked at it, but I imagine it's like probably more than the launch peak of Crashlands 2, probably. So if you imagine like being inundated with
insane
every day, every single day for months,
I remember, like,
years,
so again, it's kind of the same thing. Then, like talking about their problems, like they have different problems than we have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just different problems. Yeah.
But then also hearing about how they made the game was super interesting because again, this is where I found it super fun to chat with them because they were telling us about the analytics stuff that they built into the cards. So they could tell, essentially find weak points where the cards weren't, things people just never fucking picked or whatever else. And that whole thing was just fascinating because it was like, that's what you'd have to do to balance that game super effectively, right? Was like somehow be able to have insight on like all the fucking cards you got. And if people actually using them, upgrading them, like how exactly all that stuff is meshing together.
You need analytics about what's not happening in the game,
exactly.
Which is it's a pretty hard thing to do, actually.
Yeah, so they told us about all that. And I was like, oh, that's so fucking cool. Like, so you get you just get these tidbits from people where it's like, yeah, we don't have the same problems as them on essentially that like, post-launch
scale
stuff, but they have other problems that are interesting that we can take little bits from, just in terms of production or design or whatever else. And so,
well, it's because their team is a similar shape in the sense that the person you talk to is not only like trying to figure out stuff on the business side, but is also fixing bugs,
yes.
And taking customer support tickets.
And knows what everybody else on the team does, right? And knows like all the things that come into place to make the game actually come out. That's a rare thing, actually. When you're in a team of our size, like I know exactly how a game goes from not existing to being out in the world and what that means, right? I don't do almost any of the elements related to it, but the team is small enough that I can understand the whole thing. If you go to something like Riot Games, right? It's like, yeah, how does an update to the Riot game client get made and out? I don't know, 1,000 people do some stuff, right? Like, and it goes through some kind of an automated build process that lives in a server farm somewhere that's maintained by a staff of 10 people. Well, I don't fucking know, and I can't. You can and probably almost nobody there knows like everything that comes into play, right? And so that's the whole. What can you actually learn from people and identifying that part, identifying the overlap and having your questions go there and finding people who you think have some kind of an overlap that you can learn from or that they can learn from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Find those people. They'll probably, at some point, some of them will know other people and they might be able to make an intro, but yeah, meeting all those people is super good. So I hope that answers the question of what we think about these prominent figureheads, because we kind of went off the rails a little bit, but I feel like we were mostly on topic.
So
so that's all the time we have for this week's episode. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, the App Store, Google Play, and pick up copies of Crashlands 2, as well as our other games. And if you've been playing them, give us a good review. And it goes a long way, and we appreciate it. So thank y'all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.